The Huawei Mate 40 Pro has been released into a very different landscape to that of its predecessor, the Mate 30 Pro. Restrictions have tightened, but that hasn't dulled the Chinese firm's enthusiasm for flagship smartphone releases. But Huawei's ace up its sleeve is supposedly Petal Search. But is it any good? Let's find out in our review of the Mate 40 Pro. Thanks for watching 9to5 Google here on YouTube. Remember to thumbs up, hit subscribe, and then tap the bell icon to be among the first to watch our upcoming videos. So hardware can only take you so far. The crux of all decent tech is still going to be software. Yes, the underlying base of the Mate 40 Pro is the same Android flavour we all know and love, but it still worryingly lacks many of the most important applications and services that are deemed essential here in the West. This has caused a race to fill the app gallery with alternatives for all of the most popular Android apps. Progress has been made, but it's not clear if that will be enough long term. Even without access to the Google Play Store, this is the third flagship and second Mate series device to launch from the Chinese firm since the US government essentially forced Google to cut ties with one of their biggest overseas partners. But let's dive in a little bit further. The Mate 30 Pro last year featured a stunning but sometimes frustrating Horizon display. It took curved displays to another level, but usability did suffer because of those curves. Huawei has stuck with slopes on either side of the Mate 40 Pro, but I must say they feel far less pronounced than on the predecessor. I'm glad that the side volume buttons have also returned, as the display tapping method from last year's device, which was handled by software, was a little finicky at times and annoying to have activate on your smartphone when it was out of sight or in a pocket, for instance. This feels like a owned design that takes cues from last year's Mate 30 series and the P40 series released early this year. After years of pumping out smartphones at more or less breakneck speed, Huawei does know how to make a good looking device, and I'd conclude that the Mate 40 Pro is a bit of a looker. That said, the glossy side rails do make the package feel a little bit tacky at times. The package is very well put together and feels very sturdy and solid, which I think is always a plus point. At 6.76 inches, it's a bit of a beast too. One-handed operation is difficult even if you do have large hands. The curved edges also mean that trying to reach portions of the display one-handed can be a real pain without adjusting your grip. Inside this behemoth though, you'll find the new Kirin 9000 chipset, 8GB of RAM and 256GB of UFS 3.1 storage. That's a solid spec sheet, even though question marks remain over the high silicon line long term. With the Kirin 9000 series being based upon the 5nm manufacturing process, it actually benchmarks higher than the Snapdragon 865 and 865 Plus in CPU performance. Not that this is a true indication of real world performance benefits though. For spec heads, the 6.7 inch Full HD Plus panel has a 2772 by 1344 pixel resolution at a 90Hz refresh rate. It's smooth, consistent, and is a pleasure to interact with, but I don't feel there's any sort of major wow factor here. It gets reasonably bright in direct lighting and does have some very minor colour shifting when viewed at acute angles. However, it's a solid panel that makes almost all content look good. Because of the reliance on AOS P, the Mate 40 Pro actually ships with the confusingly named Emui 11 on top of Android 10. It's the first flagship from the firm in recent years to ship without the latest OS, which itself means you'll miss out on many added privacy and security features built into Android 11 wholesale. Emui 11, like Emui 10 before it, has been toned down quite extensively, with a more modest approach to the look and feel of how Android should run. I was never really a massive fan of the over-the-top alterations provided by Emui previously, but for the most part, I can actually deal with Emui 11. It still needs a lot of work to really stop getting in the way of things, and the insistence on using Huawei alternatives gets annoying, but it is understandable here given the lack of Google access. The app gallery has come a long way in 12 months, but as with most things in life, having an alternative is a nice sentiment, but it just doesn't translate when you want the real thing. Here, Maps will never match Google Maps. Huawei Mail lets you gain access to your Google email account, but it will never be as useful as Gmail. It's through no direct fault of Huawei that is the case though. What can they actively do to skirt this? Well, Petal Search does help quite a bit. Think of Petal Search as a portal to app repositories like APK-Pure. Sideloading applications is of course not something we actively recommend, but Petal Search acts as a sort of basic app store, and it does make it much easier to get applications lost through the Play Store lockout. I found it incredibly tough to use the P40 Pro just utilising the app gallery, but Petal Search does make it easier to get access to many of your commonly used applications. With that said, it feels like a band-aid over a broken bone though at times. Certain applications, such as Gmail, simply won't run correctly without access to the underlying Google mobile services. That isn't the case for all Google applications, as Google Maps and Chrome work without hiccup. It is a bit of a lottery though as to what you'll be able to sideload and use effectively. I will say that performance is very good though. At no point has the Huawei Mate 40 Pro felt bogged down or slow in any way. Granted, unless you're happy to sideload, you won't really have much to tax this powerhouse smartphone. The Huawei Mate 40 Pro Halo style camera setup utilises a simply massive 1/1.28 inch 50 megapixel RYYB sensor, which along with the P40 Pro are the biggest camera sensors in smartphones to date. That means in theory increased natural depth of field on shots, but it isn't always true in practice. Alongside the mammoth sensor, you get a 20 megapixel ultra-wide angle lens and a 12 megapixel 5x optical periscope zoom lens. As a triple camera setup, it covers all of the bases and then some. With that main sensor, images are pixel binned, so 50 megapixel shots produce 12.5 megapixel final images. The results are fantastic and the image quality rivals the best on the market, especially when using the periscope zoom lens. Images are sharp right throughout the frame, even at 5x, with good dynamic range and colours throughout. At night, the RYYB sensor produces magic with just a single camera shutter press. I'm not always a fan of the steely tones that Huawei seems to push in their camera line in the night mode, but it is definitely a striking look that I've often stated reminds me of Batman's Gotham City. As far as camera system goes, this might be the most utility rich out there. There are no scenarios where you won't be able to capture excellent results. The 4400 mAh battery inside the Mate 40 Pro is actually smaller than that of the Mate 30 Pro from last year. A bump down in the overall battery capacity though isn't one that massively hinders the Mate 40 Pro, as it maintains the firm's exceptional lifespan track record in recent years. I have found it hard to kill the battery on a daily basis, although I'm not what you'd consider a power user. I do have a feeling though that no access to many of my regular Google apps and services have resulted in fewer background processes sapping away at the battery. So in essence, the Huawei Mate 40 Pro is a good smartphone, and it doesn't necessarily feel groundbreaking like the P40 Pro did with regard to camera performance, but it has a little bit of everything that would ordinarily make it a must-have. Now for the obvious bit. Without official access to the Google Play Store, it is a no-go, or at least we can't give it any sort of seal of approval. Petal search does make things a little bit easier, but it's a bit of a crapshoot at times as A, sideloading applications brings about certain security issues, and B, many apps you try and sideload don't work without the prerequisite Google Play services. It's then confusing as you effectively have this grey market for apps alongside a legitimate app gallery. I get that it's a temporary measure until software gaps are filled, but we were promised more over 12 months ago when bans were issued. Purely from a competition perspective, it is disappointing to see a smartphone effectively going to waste without access to the services and apps that could make it an excellent alternative choice for markets where it is set to go on sale. While things are still uncertain for the Chinese firm globally, the only certainty for now is the Mate 40 Pro is just another solid piece of hardware let down by a lack of official access to the software, making it a viable option in the West. So with all that said, would you pick up the Mate 40 Pro even without proper access to the Google Play Store? Are you happy to sideload apps? Let us know down in the comments section below. But until next time, this is Damien with 9to5 Google saying thanks for watching, and I will speak to you later.